They're broken that their life ended up this way, and they're wondering if there's ever hope for them. The most that I see, that I work with, see themselves as something that can never be worthy to do anything of value.
And so what do you do? Where do you lead them?
Yeah, so my biggest thing is that forgiveness is real.
Hey, thanks for coming to Storypower TV. I really appreciate you being here. I hope that you'll hit that like button and that subscribe button if you're watching on social media. And if you're on OBBM, make sure you favorite this one and hang on to it as well. Let your friends know about it so that you can be a part of this conversation. I'm going to tell you, this is a conversation that might get your panties in a bunch. It just might. It might also make you feel like, holy cow, I can't believe I'm watching this in public. So if you're watching on your phone, you probably put your earphones in. I'm just saying, because we tell the truth here. This is Storypower TV. Who is Jesus to you? And why should I care? That's what we're going to talk about. But my guest in studio today has a minute of experience dealing with the worst of humanity on their worst day. And you're going to hear some truth you may not be ready for. I'm just telling you, if you've ever been a victim and you've ever been triggered, trigger warning, it's the best you're going to get. But help me welcome my in-guest studio, Ms. Marti Martin. Thank you so much for being here. Appreciate you. Now, we've known each other about a dozen years now and done ministry together.
Yes, we
and
have.
had many, many conversations together, but I don't think we've ever been in front of a camera together.
Yes, we have, one other time.
One other time, that's right, we did. Two, because we did the live to
Maybe
promote
three.
the event and then the events, yeah. So let's talk a little bit about what you've been doing over the last couple of days. I mean, you stepped aside from ministry for a short period of time.
Yeah, I mean, in the way that I was doing it, you might say. But what I've done is I've stayed consistent in the ministry to minister to incarcerated sex offenders before their release. So that's been the biggest passion, I think, of what God has called me to do. That's the one that hung around when I was too sick to do anything else. I'd gone through a bad health experience. And during that recovery time, I didn't do much. But after that, I did. And this is the one thing that has stayed a consistent thing in my life. And I think I'll probably do it forever because God has put it on my heart.
I had a conversation with a lady one time, and she was talking about her passions and her wants and her desires. And sometimes what you want and what God wants for you, they don't line up, Jonah. The Nineveh march, et cetera, et cetera. But I think there's a difference between the thing that I'm passionate about because it excites me, it makes me happy, it, trips my trigger, and an oracle. And I think that oracle is when that message from God is so deeply burdened in you that you couldn't get away from it if you tried. Right. That's more of the Elijah and the Mount Carmel. I don't think Elijah ever woke up and went, watch this, when he went to Mount Carmel. I just think he got there and saw those people acting like fools and said, what else can I do except declare the glory of God in their face in an ostentatious way that they cannot argue with? And it sounds like you've kind of got an oracle type of a burden.
Well, yeah, I think everybody wants to do pretty ministry, to be real honest, And I remember getting to the spiritual point where I said, I really don't care what this ministry looks like. I don't care what you've called me to do. I just want to be equipped, confident, and have a heart for it. Because then it doesn't ever feel like work. And this one was the one out of all of the things that I was doing. We do a million things in ministry because we're trying to do the breakthrough of what God has really called us to do, right? Well, I didn't think the circle was going to land on this, to be honest. I was trying to do pretty ministry like everybody else, I was back of the days when it was women of faith. Let's get the big purses and the red high heels and let's go do this thing. And but that's not what I was called to do. I was called to get my hands dirty, to get down in the roughest parts of the world and really help pull people out, literally by the hair of the head. It's one of those. And so my heart was, because my father was a convicted sex offender that did 7 years. Now, it's not because I just woke up one day and just said, oh, I just think, that
this would be fun.
Yeah, no, it just, it's actually literally the part of your life that you want to bury. You're just like, I don't really want to tell people about this. Well, my father did. He committed a sex crime. And with that, he went away to prison. As a result, he was not in my life. I was not in his life. And then when he got out, 2 years later, he was murdered. And so, very rough life. I had a very rough life. So coming to Jesus in my late 20s and saying, God, why would you want me? I'm from the wrong side of the tracks. I mean, look where I came from. There's nothing good, out of me. But yet I felt this calling. And so, you go through these years of where you're trying to prepare yourself only to realize you can't prepare yourself. Only God can prepare you for what he's doing in you and through you. And he wants to prepare you in order to make a difference in the world. He doesn't care less about your desire to be on television or your desire to be this or your desire to be that or to be all of this fancy stuff. Right. He is interested in hearts. And if we can sit there and say, God, I give you this the best I know how. Now, where I stand today is like, okay, this is a message that people don't really want to discuss. They don't want to discuss their pornography problems, their attractions to, younger children. They don't want to discuss these things out loud. So I thought, well, I've got to figure out how to get this out to where people can hear this in a private nature so that they can get some help. Because there is help. Jesus Christ is the answer. Now, nobody wants to hear that. They want to just think they can overthink it or make it go away or just, think on something else. You can for a while. You can. But Jesus is the only one that can set free. You can go to counselors. You can learn all of the avenues on how to wish this away or think it away or punish yourself.
Or take a pill.
Take a pill and forget about the world. But honestly, only Jesus can set free and just cleanse and make us whole, make us brand new on the inside, forgetting all of those things that are the most embarrassing, shame-filled things that we've done in private life and really erase it. And so that's what Jesus does. That's the hope that he brings. I am not afraid of people who have committed crimes. I'm afraid of people who don't accept Jesus because I know he's the only way that you can really get clean from this.
Well, and I think when it dawned on me, we got that story of David and Bathsheba and Uriah. And when the prophet came and he gave his little scenario and David went, that guy ought to die. And then the prophet said, but David, you are that man. I think that was the moment that it dawned on me that my addiction to pornography was not a bad idea. It was not a bad plan. It was not a chemical imbalance. It was a sin. And the power in that acknowledgement was that for mental health, there are counselors. For a chemical imbalance, there are pills. For all these other behavioral modifications, there's a practice, there's a habit, et cetera, et cetera. And all that's fine, but for sin, there's only one solution. Mm-hmm. And addressing it, like you said, and all these other ways of getting rid of it, without Jesus, you can't. I mean, you can fix it, but like he said, you can sweep the house clean, but those 7 demons are coming back, and they're going to be worse than one that you think you got rid of. You get rid of this little addiction, habit, problem, whatever you want to call it. If the Spirit doesn't fill that place, it doesn't get any better.
Right.
And that's a huge issue.
Yeah, you can find yourself going back to your weakness. And some people don't have drug addiction. Some people have sex addiction. Right. And that's where this one would fall. Some people have both. Some people get into their alcohol or drug addiction, and then it kind of leads into this. And so I don't always see both. I do some. But sometimes, I think the sex offenders would say, no, I don't use drugs, or the other way around. Just because I'm a drug addict doesn't mean I'm a sex addict too.
Right.
And so, there are these different areas, but the thing about it is, until we get this big, ugly monster out in the middle of the table and willing to discuss it, because that's the best thing you can do, is talk to somebody. And if you have committed a sex crime, you cannot go to a counselor and just be free and open if you've done abusive things, because they will say, excuse
They're
me,
obligated
sir.
by law. Yeah.
By law, they pick up the phone and they call. So there's no way that you'll get incarcerated. You know, if child pornography is found on your computer. And I have friends that have horrific stories about their children in the household viewing child pornography and all of a sudden getting a knock on the door from police officers saying somebody looked at child pornography. And they're pulling everyone out of the household, they're unloading the house, they're looking for, you know, they're blaming everybody until they know who to blame. I mean, it is a terrible, terrible fiasco of a mess. And so this pornography thing has gotten so rampant. I mean, you hear about the P. Diddy stuff, you hear about what's happened now in so many churches, so many pastors have fallen, and nobody wants to talk about it out loud because it's either, you know, consequences of law enforcement, or there's consequences of losing family members. I mean, it's a big, and then when they do get in trouble, when they do have, you know, when they get aggressive in sexual acts, because 23% of people who view pornography, because pornography now has gotten quite violent. Now, I've not seen it, only hear about it, thank God. But, you know, if there's 23% of people who will view this and they will take this role play and they will emulate these things in their own lives, in their own sexual behaviors, which means they're getting aggressive, they're getting, you know, dangerous. And what happens is you can get in trouble for that.
Well, in Romans 1:21 said they've exchanged the truth of God for a lie. They've given up their natural lust for unnatural lust. And for that reason, God's given them over to a debased mind. And what it really means is that they've reached the place where even good common sense doesn't apply anymore. They can't connect themselves with truth or good sense. And so they fall off the cliff. Dr. Gallagher, Steve Gallagher, I think was his name. I've got his book, Worshipping at the Altar of Sexual Idolatry. And I remember when I was reading that book and studying it for the first time before I was asked to teach on it, he made a comment and he said, you know, there's a progression in addiction. And he said, first I'm going to tell you, if you're in addiction, there's something you're doing right now that if you looked back a couple of years ago, you would have said, well, but I'll never do that. And now you find yourself doing it and you're thinking, how did I get to here? He said, I'm also going to tell you that the end game for the enemy is a man taking sexual advantage of a child. He said, anywhere you are on that progression right now, I don't care where you are on the progression, Victoria's Secrets, standard magazines, magazines with girly ads.
Yeah. This is not who I'm dealing with. I wish, you know, because this gets real ugly.
Well, and here's what he's saying. If you're there now, you may be saying to yourself, well, I would never actually act on it.
Or do that.
But if you're an addict, it's guaranteed you will. It's not if, it's when. And then if you say, well, I would never have an affair, I would never go to a bathhouse, I would never do those things. When you find yourself doing those things, keep this in mind. At one point you said, while you're doing this, I'll never do this. And while you're here, understand, pedophilia is in your future. Violent sex acts are in your future.
Yeah.
And if you don't get off this path, if you don't break this addiction, that's your destiny.
Yeah, because the depravity.
Because you've walked away and your mind can't be redeemed until
God's
you're ready
allowed
to set
you
it
to go into full force into your addiction. And when that happens, you no longer have a gauge of when this is too much or when you've crossed over. You may have a thought that comes to mind. That may be the Holy Spirit trying to say, hey, that may be God trying to shake you into attention. But what happens is when you get this far gone, the men that I'm dealing with, what they will say at times is, after, you know, doing sexual acts with children, forcing them, they will say they wanted it. And I'm like, oh, no. That's your mind
Well, it's your
that
way
said
of
that.
justifying
This
it,
child did not want this. They may have wanted your attention. They may have wanted your love and your you know, that kind of thing, not this. You have internalized the wrong thing. You don't know what you're saying anymore. So this depravity, you know, they really think that a child wanted them to do what they did to them.
Well, and there's something in the mind of the addict, and I've expressed this in different ways before, but if the addict is an alcoholic, for an example, drink the entire case of beer watching the first Saturday afternoon football game, realizes that I need more beer, straps their toddler in the back seat, and drives drunk to the local liquor store to buy another case of beer and come back and do it again. If you were to say to them, your neighbor just put your kid in the back seat of their car and they're driving to the beer store, but they've already had a case, they would go ballistic. How dare you put my child at risk like that? And yet they're unwilling to see that their behavior is exactly the same risk. Mm-hmm. That's because the addict is blinded to the consequences and the impact that their lifestyle choices have on other people. And they have to justify. Yep. They have to be able to say, well, but I'm a better driver than so-and-so. Well, I drive like this all the time. I'm actually not even drunk. Now that we're running television campaign ads that say, if you're tipsy, you're drunk.
Yeah.
If you're 0.1, you're over the legal limit. Well, is that what most people would call sloppy drunk? No, it's what most people would call dinner.
Yeah,
which is
we
sad.
We don't have a good gauge on that for sexuality and sexual
at
purity.
All.
So,
well, and we have the counter instead. We have pedophiles in the school system.
Yeah.
Teaching in classrooms.
Yeah, which makes our children easy prey. So
we're grooming our children for that purpose.
It's very scary because the mental health people will tell you this is not a mental health issue. They'll say it's a behavioral issue. All right, behavioral is dealt with through law enforcement.
Right.
So it's like, okay, so nobody's owning this. The church must own this issue. Well, we must get it out on the table, and that's where my passion comes in.
I think the other problem too is that where law enforcement would get involved
is in a bad spot.
Well, it's already gone too far.
Right.
Right. And so there are those who have been caught in the act or they've been, found out, and they'll take their own life.
Yeah.
Well, that may seem to you like vengeance or revenge, but that's not God's intent.
Yeah, it's so funny.
Even the victimizer, God wants to redeem.
You mentioned a story like that. When I started this prison ministry all these years back, when God was dealing with me about it, He said, your dad committed a sex crime. I had to be reminded of that. It's like, yeah. And then I realized, and I put all the dots together, how my life, it shaped and changed the entire trajectory of my life because of what happened to my dad. And I never had noticed it until that point. And I thought, how many children must be affected like me?
Right.
And there's a lot more now than ever. And so, I thought I've got to do something. And so getting an audience of people that will listen to this issue, it's like people will say, oh, pornography is the new drug. Yeah. And then that's it. Why everybody does this in secret? They're all in secret, incognito. And so they don't feel like this is a tabletop discussion.
Right.
And I'm trying to get it there because if we don't start talking about it and people just keep burying it, they're getting more and more perverted in mindset and nobody wants to discuss it. Wives find out and they just say, oh, that's okay. As long as I know he didn't get with another woman or touch a woman. Ma'am, you just invited him into your bedroom, okay?
Yeah.
You just invited the whole world in. You have no idea, people have no idea how this ends up. I have 35-year-old men who cannot perform normally with their wives. Why is that? Because they have something stuck here, right. And they can't. It doesn't work that way. The whole system has been hijacked. There's people who have no idea that when you suddenly look at somebody else's body as just something of pleasure, an object of pleasure for you, you've already lost everything that God created divinely for how we look at each other. Sex is God's idea. People get blown away by that because they're forgetting that. It's God's idea, but there is a very strict paradigm in which it's performed.
So what do you say to those who, like our famous pop artist would say, I was born this way? Whether it's multiple partners, the big commentary on all the blogs and podcasts right now is body count. How many different lovers have you been with, and does it count? And I even heard somebody say the other day, body count, and I remember what her condition was, but she said after XYZ happens, body count doesn't count anymore. It's like being a virgin. It's like hitting reset. You start all over again. And I'm like, I don't know. We're going to warp, twisted.
It's just deceptive
physics.
Thoughts. And so what God has given to be sanctified between a marriage of a man and a woman the devil has taken and perverted and twisted and deceived and did everything possible to make people crave the pleasure of what that is, not the love component of what God created it to be.
So how many of the RSOs that you work with are trans?
I don't have any right now that I'm working with that are trans. They don't. They break it up pretty. Like if you're male, but you identify as female, then you really they don't let you come into the male prison. So you have to go with your medical gender, if that makes sense.
So if you're female,
when you're
identifying as
incarcerated,
male,
so if you're
female,
female, you're going to be in a female prison, even if you identify as male. So it's going to go strictly by your medical gender. We have to lean into medical, like
So
how were you medically created?
How many of the men in the men's prison have you encountered who would have preferred to be in a women's prison? And I only ask
there's
this
some in there.
because there's been a public story in the last couple of years of a guy who identified as a female, but he had sexually molested multiple women and was sentenced for rape. And then they finally put him in a female prison because of the new laws and the new worldviews that.
Yeah, I know. We get to go to the restroom with him too.
Yeah, and then
Along
he
with the
raped
kitty cat
several
litter.
women. With the cat. Yeah. Furries. So what are your thoughts on that? Because to me, I look at it as a former addict, and I say somewhere along that line of debaseness, anything goes.
Yeah.
In fact, the imagery that God gave me when I first read that, if you were here and said I'll never be here, but now you're here now, this is your destiny if you don't get off the path. I had the imagery of hanging over the Grand Canyon with nothing but a shoestring of grace around my neck. And God was saying, there's a point when I just cut the shoestring and you fall in. And there's no coming out of it. Mm-hmm. And everything you've ever imagined that you said I wouldn't becomes an insatiable desire. Mm-hmm. So step away now or be forever lost. Yeah,
well, the stepping away for now or be forever lost is, I don't ever think, I personally, because I always like to look and veer on the side of faith, I don't ever like to look at a situation as hopeless. Okay, so the trans thing is a little different subject matter. I think that is, I don't know how sexually effective as far as how it ends up affecting them. Like many of the trans men still desire women. So this, exactly how that functions, I'm not sure. So the trans genders, I guess where my compassion comes for them is that they're truly unhappy with themselves as what they were created to be by God. And so they're trying to look for ways to accept themselves or to say that I'm this and to be different in order to accept themselves. So there's a deceit thing going on that says, if you look at this, it says I'm not good enough at who I am. I can understand that. I've felt that way myself. I'm not good enough at how I was made or how I was created or how things panned out, whatever it is. And if you have a certain weakness and you're disposed to go a certain direction, I can see where that might become temptation, where it's like, I'm not good enough, so I'm going to redo who I am, what I am. And so I can see how that thought pattern can get in. And I think what it does for me is it completely breaks my heart because I feel like people are struggling with worth and value. And they just think they have to be something different in order to be who they really are. And that's where it breaks my heart.
You work specifically with those who are coming out of the prison, meaning they've served their time.
Right.
In effect, they've paid their price to society. How then do you help them to view their victims?
Most of them are they're very sorry for what they've done. Of course, this is at the point that they've already, served their entire term. They've had usually many years. Texas incarcerates for a very long time for sex offense. So most of them are getting older. They're kind of past their prime, if you will. And they're sad They're broken that their life ended up this way, and they're wondering if there's ever hope for them. The most that I see, that I work with, see themselves as something that can never be worthy to do anything of value.
And so what do you do? Where do you lead them?
Yeah, so my biggest thing is that forgiveness is real.
I encourage you to go to storypoweracademy.com and check it out. Look at the different classes, the different levels, the different things that are available. You can take a lot of them a la carte. But spend some time there and see if that's the kind of thing that would change the way you communicate as a leader, as a pastor, as a counselor, as a political leader. And if that will help you, I'd love to have a conversation with you. Again, only 10 people in the elite speakers. You will have to apply for that. But if you're a candidate, I'd love to have that conversation with you. I'm J Loren Norris with Storypower Academy. I look forward to seeing you inside.
Yeah, so my biggest thing is that forgiveness is real. Now, does that make everybody, once you get out, trust you? No, it doesn't. You are going to have to do things to help yourself respect yourself again, because respect falls from you. It's all coming from you. If you respect yourself because you're happy with yourself and what you do, and you lay down at night and you say, you know what, I did the very best I could in every way possible here in my life, in my heart. I'm authentic to who I know God has called me to be, and I worked as hard as I could, and I tried not to do anything that would be displeasing. And you go to bed like that at night, you wake up and you feel good about yourself. Now, that if you are doing that every day, you're a changed individual. You're not fighting to say, how far can I go anymore with this thing that's kind of attractive to me. You're now fighting the battle saying, I want to be so pure before you, Lord. So getting people to that place is where I'm working, and helping them to know there's still purpose and value in your life. And will people ever accept you? No, there's going to, and I am very upfront with that. There are many people in this world that will never have the bandwidth for who you are, because based on what you did all those years ago, they'll never think that you're different. They'll never think that you're transformed. They'll never think that you've ever done anything good, because they don't understand that a person can truly be transformed by the power of God, by the blood of Christ. They do not believe that really cleanses and makes whole. And so, you know, even if it's your family and you're getting out, you're going to have to prove yourself. You're going to have to just wait and let God show them you are truly different. But I see many men come out. They become successful. A lot of them have to start their own businesses, because you can't just work anywhere when you've got the label. You can't be around children. You can't be around schools. I mean, there's a lot of rules to follow. We're very strict on that in Texas, which is good. It's not bad. You know, would I just immediately trust somebody? No, I would do like anybody else. Let me just watch you. Let me just see, you know, let's see the substance. Yeah. Let's see the substance of what God has done in your heart. You know, this makes all the difference. That is the difference that makes all the difference, is when they start seeing God is in you.
So for those who are connected to, the daughter of, the wife of, the parents of a currently incarcerated RSO, what would you say to that?
Okay, so just so you know, clearly, a lot of these offenses happen within families. Uncle so-and-so molested so-and-so's daughter, the cousin did this, and I mean, a lot of this happens in families. It completely breaks the family. If you see a family all sitting on a stone, I will show you when a sex offense comes in, there's a big old crack. You've got people who will choose this side, people who will choose that side. The biggest one who will stay in the middle and try to keep both of them together is mom. Usually it's mom. And mom will say, I'm going to love him. He might be in jail, he might be in prison, he might have done horrible things, but he's still mine. And she'll stand with him. The brother over here, in which the one that he had molested, they may never speak to them again. They may even distance themselves from mom. Mom may even be forced at some points to distance herself from this one. So this is a lifelong sentencing. Even once you get out, what always confused me is that people would say, "Why are you working with sex offenders? They're in prison." It's like, I think the big confusion here is you all don't know they're getting out.
Right.
They're getting out. They don't.
If they
stay
didn't get
here.
a death penalty, yeah, there'll be a day
Getting
they're back on
out.
the street.
They're coming back to a neighborhood near you.
Well, and I think the other part of that too, in one of our previous conversations, we talked about the permissible will of God, the perfect will of God, and the redemptive will of God. And that 2 Peter 3:9 is such a strong verse. He said, "I'm not slow keeping my promises. I'm patient, not willing that any should perish."
Yeah.
When I was in prison, you came to see me. It's not about the salve that brings peace to the savage beast. It's about the redemptive work of Christ being made knowledgeable to the people who are serving the time for what their consequences for what they did. Yeah. Now, if what they did landed them in prison, a lot of society has already given up on them, but an almighty God has not.
Never.
And to assume that because they're there, they're throwaways, that may be true in society. It may be true in your family. You may have just done away with them.
Yeah.
But I know people who've done away with somebody because they burned the lasagna. Mm-hmm. I know people who've done away with somebody because they bought the wrong car, married the wrong woman or man or whatever. But God doesn't do that. And so finding an emissary who's willing to go into that environment and go, I know who you were. I know maybe even who you think you are. But more than that, I know whose you are, and I know his ability to redeem that.
Because I know of the loneliness and the life that will be offered to them when they get out. And it's not going to be an easy road. I'm very forthright with that when I work with them. Because I understand these things, I try to help them connect with God so hard because that's who they're going to need.
Right.
He's the only one that can bring them the breakthrough that they are going to need. And, I think it's so sad in our society how, everything has become sexual, literally. I mean, even little girls' outfits. I mean, they're just like, why are you doing that? Why are you putting this on such a small little girl? She doesn't need to be seen as a sexual object. We are sexual beings. God created us that way. But we're training them to flaunt in such a way that brings attraction to themselves in this kind of way. And when somebody has this narrative going on in their life, you're pulling, that's who you're pulling. Well, you're not pulling a holy man that's looking at you just going, oh man, one day, she's going to be a wonderful. No, you are pulling everything from this black side. From the bad side, the dark side.
And you don't put a cow on a hook and throw it in the lake if you're fishing for trout.
No.
Trout don't eat beef. Mm-hmm. And if you're not at least cognizant enough to know what it is you're fishing for, then you're not going to know what the bait is. But the challenge is we've made all of our little girls and our little boys bait. I think I was in my early 20s when I read James Dobson's Bringing Up Boys. Mm-hmm. And there's a chapter in that book where he talks about sons between 6 and 10 where obviously they're fully potty trained, they can take care of themselves and go to the bathroom, and they believe in their mind's eye, I'm invincible. They don't see harm at all. And so as a son of a single mom, there were many times that she would, in a restaurant or at the mall or at the movies, go to the bathroom if you got to go. Mm-hmm. And I would leave and nobody paid any attention whether I was gone for 2 minutes or 25 minutes. God only knows what could have happened.
Yeah.
But when we look back at incidences like that, there are many occasions where I'll go into the men's room even today and do my business and leave, and there's still somebody in that first stall.
Yeah.
And you're like, what are you doing in there?
Yeah.
And, whether you can hear their phone or not, that may be one indicator, but others are just waiting for an opportunity. Oof. And that's a frightening concept.
It's just scary to me, between music lyrics and all of these different things, nothing is set up for how God set things up to be. We're to love and appreciate one another, not look at each other as objects to pleasure. You know, how can I get what I want to get out of you? That's when you know you're already crossed over to the demonic side and how that works. You know, it's very devious how Satan works to take the stronghold of the mindsets of young people right now. And that's the scary part. Younger men, younger boys can get involved in pornography and just think it's funny, it's cool, whatever, you know, do all of their experimentation with it, but they don't know long term where this goes. I do. Unfortunately, it's worst case scenario.
Right.
But I already know 23% will get violent in sexual acts, and they will begin to act out in these deviant ways that can bring a big consequence to their life that they're not going to want to live.
How many people do you believe are in America incarcerated right now as RSOs?
I just know that there's 86,000 incarcerated sex offenders in the state of Texas.
Wow.
So that's a lot, and I work with every one of them that I can.
How many do you work with?
In the world, I think there is just as many in California and Florida, and maybe a little bit more in California. And it's a much smaller state, if you think about that. And that's pretty bad. So, you know, there's these, the numbers are not good. And when you see how we have elevated, like the P. Diddy kind of situations, you know, where they just come in and get people drugged to where they're just taking advantage of them and it's all fun and games. You know,
and there's no criminal penalty.
There's
for
not
them.
been any criminal penalties until now that they actually have the evidence, you know, so they can do something with it.
We still don't know if there'll actually be a prosecution,
Yeah.
and that's really the irony.
It appears they will be, but
there are a lot of people who live that lifestyle.
Yeah.
And it's totally cool in the environment that they live in to live that way, to rent a child for whatever. The movie Sound of Freedom is a perfect example of that. The quote that the cartel member made when he said, you know, I can sell a bag of cocaine and that money comes and goes.
Yeah.
I can sell the same little girl 5 times a day for 10 years.
It's just, ugh.
But that means there's a market for it, which means 86,000 is a lot of people in the state of Texas, but it doesn't even scratch the surface of the marketplace. And yet, from the sexualization of our kids in schools to the conversations they're having on every form of TikTok. I watched an interview not too long ago between 3 girls who were OnlyFans participants, meaning they had their own OnlyFans page. And the guy that they were talking to said, so what is it you're looking for in a man? And the girl said, well, he's got to be over 6'5". He's got to be fit. He's got to be in great condition. Needs to make more money than I do so that I can quit my job and he can take care of me. And he said, okay, well, give me an idea. What does that look like? And she goes, oh, I'm an OAF top producer. And he said, okay, well, what does that mean? She said, about 200,000. He said, so 200,000 a year, that puts you in the top 3% earners. Oh no, honey, a month, 200,000 a month in cash flow from selling her body in front of a video camera. Where do you think you're going to find a man that makes $2.5 million a year? I mean, just take the male population of the earth at 8 billion total people, 4 billion males. How many are over 6'5"?
No.
1%. Now let's add to that how many make $2.5 million a year that they're willing to give to a girl that's been selling her body. And your answer is 0. You've disqualified yourself for any human on earth saying that's my bride.
I think this whole standard of setting our standards based on these ideas and based on what we see hip hop stars doing and what we see people doing, and that's become our model, you know, these people who are in these high places that are making all this money in this way that is detrimental to society and the minds and hearts of kids is just, it's the worst thing ever. And then everybody has just gone silent. The mental health people say, well, it's really not a mental health issue, it's a behavioral. Oh, okay, well, behavioral's dealt with by law enforcement. So that means they don't get in trouble until there's a crime committed.
Right.
You know, and I'm just like, we as the church must speak up. We must stand up. We must stand in. We must fight for our kids. We must fight for the purity of mind to get back what God has given us, which is His idea. His idea, because sex was His idea.
So what would you say in the last couple of minutes, what would you say to someone who's on the path, they maybe realize, hey, if I'm not careful, I'm going to find myself in that same position.
Get help now.
From who?
The best thing you can do is start praying. The next thing you can do is pray for God to send you somebody who can talk to you and help you. He is faithful. He will do that. Anybody can reach out to me. I'll send them in the directions they need to go. There's some counselors you can talk to. What you will not want to do is discuss, anything that has to do with
behavior that has
any
legal
behavior,
consequences.
right? Pedophilia, anything like that. If you have attraction to that, you need to be careful with discussing that with a counselor. They'll talk to you about sex addiction all day. They'll help you with those matters. And they'll help you to, but you've got to deal with God on the level of where you're at, because the level is really telling. And so you must come to Christ first.
Well, and the truth of the matter is, people probably won't forget you or won't forgive you, won't let you off the hook, won't let it slide. And while God's not going to remove the consequences, He will forgive you.
The church is not equipped to deal with criminal behaviors.
Right.
The law enforcement is. And so, you come to the church and you want to get help with certain things, but if you've committed a crime, then, that's a different issue.
Right.
That this can get you in trouble. We see this happening with pastors right now. And you've got to reach out. You've got to get some help. First of all, reach out to God. I say reach out to God. Gain wisdom and insight and get help from Him. He will lead you to scriptures, because the best transformation in this is Jesus Christ, but also through talk therapy. So someone safe to talk to is one of the best things that you can do. A lot of husbands end up talking with their wives. Their wives get angry at first. Sometimes they want to, throw them out. But I see a lot of wives who stand with their husbands. Nobody cares about the stuff that is happening in it until it affects them.
Right.
And we've got to get a little bit ahead of it, so that we're talking more freely about, sexuality. Kids, for some reason, have an impression that it's a great way to find out more about sex, because, they're all told, don't have sex. They're told, don't have sex, but yet they're curious. And
Right.
so they're like, oh, I'll find out like this. Poor idea.
And what they find is inaccurate information.
Very inaccurate information. And it's unfortunate that our churches aren't talking about it enough, our schools aren't talking about it enough, and it's got to get out there, because talk therapy is the best thing.
Very good. Well, I appreciate you being here on Storypower today. Thanks for coming out, Marty. Mm-hmm. And just as she said, the only way to overcome the evil one is by the blood of the Lamb and the word of your testimony. The word of your testimony, that's talk therapy. You've got to be willing to share your story. And the first place you've got to share it is face-to-face with the King. And if you can't come clean with yourself and come clean with God, that confession, without that, you're done. When David said, that man should die, and the prophet said, David, that man is you. In that moment, David said, I have sinned against Bathsheba, Uriah, and my God. And he began lamenting, that process of saying, I'm sorry for what I've done wrong. And if you're not there yet, let me just tell you something. That light, that's not the light at the end of the tunnel. That's a train. And if you don't get off these tracks, it will slaughter you. You've got to get past this addictive problem. You've got to get past this behavior. You've got to get past this willingness to say, it's okay, nobody knows. Because the day is going to come, and everybody's going to know. And it will destroy everything you care about, from your life to your livelihood to the people you love. Get free while you have a chance to be free. Again, I'm not telling you there won't be any consequences. There may well be consequences. But you can live eternity in heaven if you get free from the sin that owns you right now. And if you have an addiction, whether it's sexuality or anything else, you are not the master. You're the slave. You will do what it tells you to. Take the time to break free. There are some resources available, 5 battle strategies. is available on Thinkific. You can go to thinkific.com/J Loren Norris. You'll find that there. You'll also find the Storypower Academy, which will empower you in talk therapy to tell your story better. Tell a better story, better communication, and a better look at your own story. And if you're not willing to dive into those things, then get help through a pastor, through a counselor, through a coach. But don't try to do this on your own. If that worked, you'd already be free, and you're not. I'm J Loren Norris for Storypower TV. Have a blessed day.
God is doing something amazing in his body. There's a remnant of people rising up and realizing they are meant to do more than comfortably sit in the pew every week and hope to someday be in ministry. The young adults and youth of today are not satisfied with simply attending church as done for centuries. They're being called to break out of the box and multiply. If this sounds like you, then I want to tell you about a new website called findahousechurch.com. Findahousechurch.com is a free house church directory where those seeking Christian relationships can find fellowship. Your address will not be made public, and the website is designed to be as safe as you want to make it. The world wants to shut us down and shut us up, but there will be some who will break out of their complacency and begin to walk in their callings. We are all ministers if the same Spirit that raised Christ from the dead dwells in us. If you're being called to break out of the box and grow the kingdom of God, go to findahousechurch.com. That's findahousechurch.com.
There will be times in our lives when the gospel doesn't get 45 minutes. The theological treatise is out the door. The explanation of the Romans Road, too much for the moment. I still believe the best testimony in the history of time is 6 words. I was blind, now I see. What more is there?